This is going to be quite the philosophical argument, I may say. There are a number of ways you can think about the Detroit Red Wings, some of the assets that they have and what they could bring to the National Hockey League level, and there are also ways you can analyze the Vancouver Canucks. And what I wanted to do in this video was talk about a trade idea that was proposed between two of my favorite teams, and attack this from the perspective of somebody that cheers for both of them. You know, I'm a Red Wings guy, they're my third favorite team. I'm a Vancouver guy, was raised here, and the Canucks are unfortunately my number one team. Let's take a look at the R Canucks subreddit, and this post that was made by Francesco Aquilini's burner earlier yesterday. Take a look at this. The question is, how many trades will the Vancouver Canucks make before the final pick of the draft is made? This is a pretty long and introspective post that dives into a number of elements of the Vancouver Canucks. They have a new management staff, and they have their work cut out for them. The league tends to get the vast majority of their trading activity done during the lead-up to and during the NHL Draft. As it sits currently, the Canucks already have a fairly full complement of roster players under contract, so if we are going to see any real change, some guys will need to be traded. Here's the list. You've got Ogren, Pettersson, Carlson, DeBrusk, Rossi, Besser, Hoglander, Ratu, O'Connor, Sasson, Cheadle, Safonov. UFAs include Douglas and Bluger. Abbotsford, you've got Lekaramaki, you've got Braden Coots. On D's, Yves Bouillon is there, Phil Hronek, Marcus Petey, Elias Petey, Tom Villander, Mancini, Forbort, Joseph, and then in Abbotsford you've got Kirill Kudryavtsev and Jack Thompson, who had just extended yesterday. Congratulations to him. And then you also have Demko Lankin and Tolopilo. This Reddit post talks about other guys. Jake DeBrusk, he potentially could be moved. Brendan Gallagher could be brought in. Who really knows? What would you like to see happen? Is the ultimate ending of this Reddit post. And one of the comments by Spectre Fire I thought was really interesting to dive into. Now, Spec goes out there and responds to the idea of many different players and what their futures could be with the Vancouver Canucks. Jake DeBrusk, likely off the roster. Goalies, maybe there's a 50-50 chance one of them gets moved, most likely Kevin Lankinen. But Marco Rossi is brought up in this comment, and I wanted to read this here for you. Spectre Fire on the R Canucks subreddit says, Marco Rossi is an interesting name on the Canucks roster. I obviously already posted why he is a good trade option. If the Detroit Red Wings don't get a center back on the Larkin trade, if I was Ryan Johnson, I'd be ringing up Steve Yzerman and trying to get Nate Danielson out of there for Rossi. I don't know if the Yzer plan can wait for Danielson to develop into a top 6 center. And this right here opens up the possibility of an idea that I actually like a lot for both of these teams. And for my main team, the Vancouver Canucks, I don't like this for them because I dislike Marco Rossi, but more so because I feel like for Vancouver, if they are going to go through a long-term rebuild, I question whether or not a guy like Marco Rossi is actually going to be a key contributor in the next generation's worth of a competitive window the Vancouver Canucks are going to have. Hopefully with the Sedins, Ryan Johnson, and Manny Malhotra as the main cogs. Rossi is 24 years old, but he'll be 25 by the time the season starts. And I'm not saying 25 years old is old in particular. I mean, I'm 25. I'd be kind of betraying myself if I said that. But if the Vancouver Canucks are going to maximize the value of the guys that they have, would it not be reasonable to say that a guy who produced at a 22-point in 33-game sample with Vancouver, who had 60 points the year before with the Minnesota Wild full-time, and who, if you combine his numbers from last season split between two teams, he had a total of 35 points in, 51 games played? That's not bad, especially since he spent the majority of this part of his year on the worst team in the league. Would it not be fair to say that Marco Rossi, with the progression of his production and his young age, This guy would be a pretty meaningful trade target for other teams around the NHL that want to get into the playoffs or that are looking for help down the middle. The Vancouver Canucks could definitely use Rossi themselves in having a pretty competitive environment. I'm not saying that Marco Rossi's McDavid caliber or anything like that, but he helps the team stay afloat. And because his contract expires at the end of 2028, making $5 million a year, you could already open up the possibility that maybe this guy can be seen as a rental option for another team, or at the very least, an immediate patch-up at center that can be a top 6 guy if you really push him to. Marco Rossi is 5'10", 196, and a lot of people will scoff at that. A lot of scouts and NHL people seem to not like centers that happen to be shorter than 6 feet. It still happens to be a pattern for whatever reason, but Marco Rossi is one of these guys that plays a smart playmaking style. He's really skilled with the puck, and he makes great decisions, especially when you give him time and space. Rossi is a valuable piece, but I question whether or not he can be a main part of a Vancouver Canucks team that is contending starting in 2030, 2031. Meanwhile, you have Nate Danielson on the other side in Detroit. This is a player who is just on the cusp of being an NHL caliber guy. He had 28 games played with the Red Wings this most previous season, and he had 7 points. He also had 18 Griffins games and 15 points over there. Nate Danielson, by all accounts, is somebody that could project to be a top 6 caliber center, and let's just say if he ends up becoming as productive as Marco Rossi is, you're probably satisfied with that. Maybe there is potential for more, although if I'm being real, I don't really see Danielson getting more than 60, 65 points a year at the National Hockey League level. If he does do that, then okay, great. Take that WHL production, copy and paste it, and bring it into the best hockey league in the world. But Nate Danielson is a guy whom the Red Wings, even though they really like him, even though Red Wings fans really respect this guy, I wonder if they have the capacity to wait for Danielson to become the player that he can be. Rossi is already a guy. He had 60 points last year. He could potentially get 60 points again. Nate Danielson is a few years away from becoming a 60-point player at the National Hockey League level, assuming he ever gets to that point. So if you are Ryan Johnson, would it not be reasonable to try and say, hey, Stevie Y, you guys want to make the playoffs? Well, how about you take on Marco Rossi, you give us Nate Danielson, and maybe you add on another sweetener or something, because Danielson, he's not an NHL player just yet. He's not established. He's not a full-time guy. There is a level of doubt that can exist when trading a one-for-one player for prospect swing of a deal. So maybe Nate Danielson and a second or a third is something that you could actually get value from for Marco Rossi. And from the Detroit Red Wings perspective, this would be a pretty good upgrade because, yeah, Marco Rossi would automatically be the team's second-line center, assuming you don't get a first-line center back in the Dylan Larkin trade, which, hey, if Larkin gets traded and there's no center coming back regardless, you're going to have to roll with JT Compher as your number one, and that's already going to be seen as a pretty big uh-oh for the Detroit Red Wings. So might as well go out there and take a swing for a guy that could be available like Marco Rossi. Now, that's not to fully say that Rossi is obviously going to be available. I do think if the Canucks see emphasis on Rossi's long-term projection as a positive, they can think of this player as a reasonable rebuilding asset to have, not as trade bait, but as a guy that can genuinely grow alongside of this young core. I mean, if you're thinking about Braden Coots, you're thinking about Caleb Malhotra, whom it seems like the Canucks will draft, Vancouver could have a decent amount of centers long-term, and that's not even talking about Elias Pettersson, who was even older by Marco Rossi by about 3 years. So, with all that said, if Vancouver wants to fully commit to a rebuild, maybe 24 is already too old. I don't know. If Rossi has a stellar season with the Canucks this season, I could actually see him getting traded once more, even though it would go against my personal belief of actually rolling with guys in their mid-20s, because I don't know if y'all remember, but I was a really big Marco Rossi fan when he was dominating the OHL with 2 points a game in his draft-eligible season. That was crazy, and now he's a Canuck. How amazing is that? But when thinking about the long-term projections of where Vancouver seems to be, I wonder if Marco Rossi really fits into the plans. Do you think a trade Rossi for Danielson makes sense for either of these teams. If you're a Wings fan, if you're a Canucks fan, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this Vrishashroll 9, and bye.